The one group that doesn't have the lobbyist in there are the students. I want to hear from the adults. They're going to implement the system, but when it gets right down to it, we got to look out for those kids because that's what we're here for.
This is Real State, a podcast from CSG South. Join us as we talk with policymakers and public leaders shaping state-level decisions across the South and explore how ideas move from policy to real impact.
Hello, and welcome to Real State. I'm your host, Lindsey Gray. Across the South, education remains one of the most important and closely watched policy areas for state leaders. States are wrestling with big questions: how to improve student outcomes, strengthen the teacher pipeline, ensure accountability, and make sure policy changes translate into results in the classroom. In South Carolina, those conversations have included literacy and math achievement, school choice, charter school accountability, classroom distractions, teacher recruitment, and the state's long-term role in helping students and families succeed. Our guest today is Senator Greg Hembree of South Carolina. Senator Hembree currently serves as chairman of the Senate Education Committee. He also previously chaired CSG South's Education Policy Committee, bringing both a state and regional perspective to this conversation. Senator Hembree, thank you for being with us.
Lindsey, it's great to be here today. Thanks for asking me to be on.
Senator, you've been working on education issues for many years now, and South Carolina has seen a lot of policy movement in a relatively short period of time. So when you look at South Carolina's education landscape right now, what do you see as the biggest story of this moment?
I guess it probably has to do with school choice and parents' involvement in schools. Sort of a re-engagement by parents. Not that they were, ever completely disengaged, but I think that you've seen, particularly since COVID, you've seen a re-engagement by parents there was a shift that took place at that time. And quite frankly, and you kind of talked about it, but I think it's worth mentioning, the Southeast is where education is happening. I mean, I know it's always an issue all over the country. One of the, in my view, the second most important thing we do in state government is the K-12 education system. But in the Southeast, it is a hot topic, and our sister states all around us are really involved in all kinds of terrific experiments and things to try to move the needle, and they are moving the needle.
Absolutely. You've been in the legislature since 2013. So from your vantage point, how has the education conversation changed over that time? I know you mentioned COVID and how there were some shifts there, but in terms of priorities of what lawmakers now view as possible.
When I started, and I was lucky enough to get on the Education Committee in the Senate my first year, so I've been on it my entire time. When I started, though, it felt to me like, I would say, the K-12 education establishment, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean sort of the status quo in education was driving the bus. I mean, they were in charge. You had a lot of they still exist. Many organizations, teacher organizations, administrator organizations, school board organizations. I mean, all of these different groups that are out there to represent the interest of the adults in the system. And again, I don't mean to imply that there was something wrong with that was all bad, but they were really kind of in charge, and that has shifted in South Carolina in the time I'm in my 14th year now, and now that's really shifted where and I don't want to call it maybe not skepticism, but a recognition that these groups they're advocating for the groups that they represent. And one group that doesn't have the lobbyist in there are the students. I've embraced that as sort of a true north, that my goal is to represent the students. I want to hear from the adults. They're going to implement the system. Their voices are important. Their experience is important. But when it gets right down to it, we got to look out for those kids because that's what we're here for. I mean, we're not here to just give people jobs. I mean, we're here to try to provide a world-class education for all of our students in South Carolina.
Well, and that actually takes us kind of greatly into our next section, which is one of the things that stands out is that South Carolina has not focused on just one lever. So the state has been, active on school choice, scholarships, accountability, teacher pipeline issues, and classroom policy, really kind of all at the same time. So really tackling education from several angles and making sure that you're covering not just one side of the issue. So in 2025, South Carolina enacted the Education Scholarship Trust Fund through Senate Bill 62. And this session, you've sponsored a bill, I believe it's Senate Bill 692, that's working its way through the Senate now. And it would further refine eligible expenses and tighten some guardrails around participation. So what problem are you trying to solve with this bill? And what is South Carolina trying to get right in this next phase of the Education Scholarship Trust Fund?
The Education Scholarship Trust Fund, and for lack of a better way to say it, generically it's sort of a voucher program. So provides up to $7,500 for students the students that are at 300% of poverty have a preference. So they're the first ones that get the scholarship. And it can be used for private school. It can be used for a host of things. But one of the ways that we did not provide for was a homeschooling option. And this was at the request of the homeschooling community in South Carolina. In every iteration of this bill, and there have been three of them. We're in the third one. The third one made it and is in place now. We specifically prohibited this money going to homeschoolers because that's what the homeschool community wanted. The Department of Education, on their own, have interpreted the law as being eligible for what was being called homeschool 4. We have 3 homeschool options in statute in South Carolina, so we've got plenty of homeschool options. But they were calling it was being called homeschool 4. Well, there's no such thing as homeschool 4, and now it's being called unbundlers. It's just it's rose by any other name. Bottom line, it's homeschoolers that are now accessing the money. That was specifically debated and discussed and not provided for. I believe that the Department of Education has misinterpreted they've certainly misinterpreted our intent. I think they've misinterpreted the law as well. And I think they've gotten these kids way out on a limb, quite frankly. So we're in the process of trying to address this mess. We're still in the middle of a fight on that. So it'll sort out eventually, but it's certainly going to will slow it will in the future, for a while at least, will slow the progress of our efforts in education, because now we're going to be checking behind each other on everything, and that slows things down.
Yeah, I have seen the recent debates in the news, and it does seem that there's still a lot to work through, and it has been a bit contentious. And as these programs grow, I mean, what does responsible implementation look like to you as a lawmaker then? How do you fall out of that?
I describe myself as I'm a conservative with a capital C, but I'm a conservative with a small c too, and I like to, particularly with new programs, I like to roll them out slowly, take your time. I'm more interested in getting it right than getting it fast. So, I think you take it slow, you get it right, you get your fundamentals right, then you can kind of move out into the more experimental stages of the project. And to me, I think that's just smart governance, and it saves money, and it saves, it builds credibility. You've established that. Now you've got a track record. You can come back to the General Assembly and say, I can sell that. I can take that to my colleagues and I can show them with data, with hard numbers. Even you may not like this program, but I can show you it's working.
Well, sticking with the theme of accountability, let's talk about some of the other great things that South Carolina has been doing. Policy discussions in South Carolina have focused on charter schools in recent years as well. In 2025, you introduced Senate Bill 454, which was amended this session and sent to the House, it seems. So this is a charter school accountability bill that would require more disclosure, strengthen authorizer responsibilities, and expand oversight expectations. So what were the gaps or warning signs that led you to focus on charter school accountability at this point?
So a couple things. We've had for many years, we've had charter schools in South Carolina, public charter schools for about 25 years. And they reached our total public school population of about 750,000 kids. To give you some perspective, we had about 30,000 in public charter schools, so it was a pretty, relatively small number, and it was pretty stable for a long time. Then, and this was really leading up to COVID. It started, this move really started before COVID, but a couple of years before that, you could see there was an expansion of interest and I guess capacity for charter schools in South Carolina. The growth started. COVID comes along, that gives it a shot of adrenaline. I think really ramps that up. Again, I think that triggered so much more parental engagement, parental interest. They started looking for more options. So it's now about 70,000 students. So it's gone up. It's more than doubled in a fairly short period of time. So that the other was, we have a sort of a weird quirk in our law that institutions of higher education can be authorizers for charter schools. And there was absolutely no criteria for them to be authorizers of charter schools. They just had to send a letter to the Department of Education that said, I'm an authorizer, I'll just want to let you know. And, it was way too loose because the authorizers have a lot of responsibility, a lot of, fit with finances, with oversight, with, helping with, not instructing, but, sort of helping the schools that are struggling to improve. So there's, their job, they have a critical function in this. And we saw some years ago a private college that went into the charter school authorizer business, which had never been done before like that, and wasn't really what the law intended. The law intended, it wasn't stated this way, so nobody's violating the law. But I think what was in the minds of the General Assembly at the time was like a college, a university that has a university high school. Like Coastal Carolina University wants to have an on-campus high school for the professor's children, or however, something like that. That's an old model, been around for a long time. I think that was in people's minds, but small private college went into the business. Some of the schools that were in trouble, that were like kind of struggling, all of a sudden jumped to that charter school authorizer, and it's sort of, you made you feel like this might be a trap door that struggling schools can use, because if you're failing for 3 years in a row, your charter is suspended. You're out. So there were some schools that it felt like they took advantage of that. By the way, that authorizer is still around and doing a really good job. So, the skepticism that I had 8 years ago when they first started, they have allayed those fears. They're through their conduct, and they're a really good authorizer. But there's another authorizer that came in. That authorizer is now gone. That was another private school that, because the school closed. So there have been some, we bumped into some of these problems. It was obvious that the space had matured. It needed more, with that growth, it needed more it needed more rules. And quite frankly, the authorizer were telling us, we need rules. We want rules. And so they were very helpful. We sat down with authorizers, Department of Education, schools. I mean, it really was kind of everybody at the table kind of thing. It was about a 5-year process.
Like you said, the space evolved, and y'all had to strike the right balance between innovation and autonomy on one hand and public accountability on the other. So it sounds like that's what you were doing.
We're always trying to find that balance somewhere in there, which is reasonable but sufficient. And I think that's what we did here.
Well, accountability is one side of the equation. So the other is, talking about whether the state is building the capacity it needs inside the schools and making sure that y'all are focusing on that as well. So in 2024, you sponsored legislation that expanded scholarship stipends for education majors with caveats that they commit to teaching in South Carolina public schools. And we've seen that for many professions. this was applied from the teacher lens. And in 2025, Senate Bill 79 proposed a pilot allowing certain schools to hire a limited percentage of non-certified teachers under defined conditions. Like you said, you got to strike that balance, right, of some
Right.
rules. But not too many that were restricting folks so much. So when you look at the teacher pipeline, where do you believe South Carolina is making progress, and where is the state still under real pressure?
We have got our teachers that are leaving the profession has gone down. So we've seen that's trended in the last couple of years. I think it's hard to put your finger on exactly what's causing that. But one of the reasons we've raised our teacher salaries substantially. In the last 7 years, minimum salary's gone from $30,000 a year to 47.5. So, I mean, we're going to go over 50. We'll hit 50 this year. And that's what the state pays minimum teacher salary. The districts supplement that. So I think the teacher salary, the real teacher salary, is going to be somewhere around like 57, something like that for a starting teacher with no masters. I mean, just coming right out of school. So when you annualize that salary and put the benefits package on there, it gets to be a pretty good. It's a good compensation package for a first year person. That's helped. I mean, it's actually helped more than I thought it would. It's helped with retention. There've been some other retention things, and the scholarship stipend. We're already, even though it's brand new, the feedback, and this isn't scientific, it's anecdotal, but we're getting feedback from the colleges of education that they're getting some additional, they're getting an increase in the interest because of that scholarship. So those two things have helped. So right now, we're like total number of teachers for the system. We're in pretty good shape. I mean, we're not. That's not where our problem is. It's interesting too. Our state is growing very fast. South Carolina is really growing, but most of our growth is retirees. I mean, the majority of it. So our student population is not growing like our state is. It's going up just a little bit, and actually, the growth is in the charter schools. That's where we're seeing the number for the traditional K-12 is pretty flat, and then charter, there's the little bit of growth we're seeing overall is kind of in charters. But the number of teachers that we have is sufficient. Now the problem is there's two problems. One problem is there are certain areas and certain subject matters that we don't have enough of. I mean, there are parts of the state that we are there. We talk about teacher shortage crisis. On the system-wide, there's no crisis at all. That'd be a goofy thing to say. But in that district over there, they got a teacher shortage crisis. And that district over there, they can't find a physics teacher. I mean, there's nobody teaching physics in the whole system because we got about 75 school districts, and some of them are pretty small. So, you have that struggle, but it's really more about geography and subject matter than, and then, where it, like I say, where it is the problem. And those are tougher problems to solve. I mean, because if you've got a community that, they're in decline, the economy is decreasing. There's very little going on in this part of the state. Why would a bright young teacher, want to move? Why would any young person, that's a professional coming out of college want to live there, unless they're from there?
So it does seem that the needle is moving in the direction the legislature has intended with some of these policies. So, but that does not always mean the work is done, as we were just talking about. But the broader picture around education workforce remains challenging, especially around retention and those hard to staff roles, those niche roles that you just reference, like the civics teacher in a really small rural community, and really attracting those folks or retaining once you do get someone there. How do you think about the difference between short-term staffing relief and long-term workforce strength? Is there an answer there? Is there a strategy?
I think there is an answer and a strategy, and I think it is in the colleges of education. I think those are the I think, well, it's twofold. I'll go two ways here. First, in the colleges of education, I feel like in South Carolina, we have too many colleges of education, number one. Okay, we have too many of them. We have like 32 of them. And we were a state of 5 million people, and that's too many colleges of education. So but that's another conversation. My point in saying that is you've got some that do a really great job, and you've got plenty that do a pretty average job, and you got some that shouldn't be in the business at all. And there's some efforts going on to try to, you know, point out that y'all need to close yours down. You know, that you need to try something different. And many of those programs do not adequately prepare teachers for the classroom. So they go through and they learn all the pedagogy, and they do the things they need to do to become a teacher. Check, check, check. And then they go to, and the new teachers are going to get the toughest classrooms almost always. I mean, which is crazy, but it's the way it works. So then you take this poor rookie and you throw him into this, what they call the old movie Blackboard Jungle, but it was like, this really tough school with this tough class. And no wonder we lose, 30-40% of them in the first 3 or 4 years. So they're leaving the profession. So that they're not adequately prepared for that. So I think that is the long-term strategy, that the colleges of education can solve this by reevaluating their approach. The other big long-term answer is really get good at training principals, because it is absolutely the truth. So goes the principal, so goes the school. I mean, it's a cliche, but these cliches are there for a reason. I mean, that was not invented in a vacuum. That is exactly the truth. If you got a great principal, you're probably going to have a really good school. And if not this year, in 2 or 3 years. So there are people that can turn these schools around.
Beyond who is teaching, there's also the question of what conditions help students learn best. So in 2025, you also sponsored a bill that would prohibit the use of personal wireless devices in classrooms during academic instruction. We are seeing a similar bill. We are seeing similar bills in other states this session as well. Alabama comes to mind when I say that. So why did classroom distractions rise to the level of legislative concern for you? And are there key data points and performance metrics that you looked to when drafting this piece of legislation?
There was a book called The Anxious Generation that came out a couple of years ago. Jonathan Haidt wrote it. It basically makes that case that that our children are having. I mean, our mental health issues with our kids have just really. I mean, it really increased very quickly since smartphones became a thing for children, really, and teenagers. Devices, but smartphones especially. And it's it's distracting in class. It was. I mean, it was just obvious this was a problem, and I think it just sort of hit the tipping point all at once. And I mean, really all over the country. And there was just a kind of a national. And you were part of that. We were part of that in SLC or at CSG South. The recognition just kind of the light bulb went off, and a whole lot of those policies went into effect. We started with a regulation that the Department of Education sponsored, and they wrote a really strong reg that we were going to use that as sort of our experiment, kind of a pilot program, if you will, although it applied to all the schools. Worked through it a little bit, and then introduced permanent legislation. And I put the bill in, but in consultation with the superintendent said, y'all have already got this in place. Let's watch it. Again, back to my small C. I want to see how this experiment plays out, and then we can always come back and do a bill if we need to. So far, I don't know. I mean, we're still in that phase. I don't expect to try to. I didn't push that bill. Don't expect to file a bill next year. Unless there's some compelling need, but right now it's working really well. We got very little, a little bit of pushback the first 2 weeks. It was really funny. The parents were more pushing back than the kids. It was crazy. They wanted to be in constant, having this tether on their child during the middle of math class. I mean, why do you have to be in touch with your child at, in the middle of school? I mean, come on. And the kids the feedback from the kids has been overall very positive. I mean, they're actually talking with people at lunchtime, and interacting with one another, and they're it's working. So I think it's leading to some other conversations around the use of technology in school. That's even a little different conversation, but it's taking place. Like there's this move now talking. We need to get back to more pencil and paper,
Yeah.
and it's happening. So I think there's sort of this. We're in a funny, kind of a different. We're transitioning to a different stage. I think in a way, sort of away from technology.
Yeah, I've been seeing that in the news recently as well, and we've been tracking policy. I think Missouri has some policy, Maine has some policy regarding going back to pen, paper, books, and back from technology. I feel like Sweden or one of those countries um, did a study, and they've
Hmm.
implemented it, and so it's kind of moving over now to the U.S. as a potentially a strategy for schools. So that's something we're very much watching, and
I
it's
love that.
just
A
now
new
kind of
strategy for
emerging.
schools, pencil and paper, a new strategy.
I know,
Yeah.
really, it's going back. Yeah,
It's like,
you're
no,
right.
that, we do all these things, and sometimes I wonder, do some of this stuff just works? Stick with it. You don't have to change it just because a vendor is coming to your school district trying to sell you this latest, greatest, shiny lure. Maybe you should just stick with what's working. If you're doing well, just hang in there.
Yeah, and as COVID, affected so many things, I would say
Hmm.
that was another reason why I think school districts and schools were kind of jumping on that technology bandwagon. But yeah, I said new strategy, but it's really just
Yeah.
going back to the
Yeah.
way
Cutting edge, cutting
we
edge.
grew up. So, well, this brings us to the core question I think every state is asking: are students making the gains they need? Recent data suggests South Carolina has some encouraging momentum, especially in fourth grade math, and has outperformed national trends in some recent reading comparisons. At the same time, the state still faces persistent achievement gaps and workforce challenges, as all of our southern states are. But I will give a shout out to our southern states leading the way. A lot of our states, like South Carolina, leading the way in some of these fourth grade math scores and literacy scores. And I think that's, you are seeing the gains through that. Where do you see South Carolina leading right now in education? And where is the state making meaningful progress? Even if the work is not complete, it's probably never complete.
Right. I think the was hard to say that where we're leading other states because I see a lot of what we're doing happening because I kind of keep track of the rest of the, especially the Southeast. A lot of these ideas we share, we're stealing each other's stuff all the time. And I don't know that. I mean, we may get a little bit ahead of somebody else on this thing today, but then tomorrow somebody else jumps ahead of us on that. We're ramping up on our math now that some other states have already started. So that's an area that I think we'll see some more improvement in. Hopefully some improvement if the data as what the data would suggest. I think it's more just ongoing. I wish I could say there was something that we had that was just that far way ahead, but I don't really think so. We're really looking at, and you mentioned this earlier. I guess my biggest project for next year is looking at sort of classroom conduct and the trend to give the teacher a little bit more control over his or her class, and with disciplinary issues and things of that nature. And that's very principal centric quite currently. Like there are schools those are not that is not a problem because the approach, the culture that the leadership in the school undertakes. Other schools, it's like kid can threaten to cut your head off with scissors. You send him to the office, and 15 minutes later, he's back in your classroom. He just not just no never. They just don't do disciplinary. They for whatever different leadership and culture view, kind of worldview for whatever reason. Or maybe it's capacity. It could be capacity that you're just understaffed woefully understaffed to the point you can't deal with it. I don't know. It can be a lot of things.
Well, we've talked about where the state stands today throughout this conversation. And so, when you think about the next 5 years, would convince you that South Carolina is not just passing education bills, but actually building a stronger education system? And you referenced that momentum, but really that momentum is paying off. What would that mean to you, say, in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think we're going to continue to see our reading scores improve. I think we are on just the very front end. That is a long-term investment. That's something that's going to take a long time. That's the problem with elected officials who have a 2 or 4 year cycle, and a system that you're talking about a 12-year cycle. A K-12 system, or a 13-year cycle. So it's really hard to stick with a policy, to let it play itself out, to see how much real benefit does this create. I'm hopeful that we'll continue to stay the course, on the reading. I think we will, and I think when you see the success, that encourages. It makes a good case. I can go to my colleagues and say we need to keep putting money into this because it's making a difference. We do a lot of stuff that doesn't make any difference. We try, but it just doesn't work out. Well, this experiment's working out, so I think we'll continue to see reading. I'm hopeful about math as well. I think but when you talk about in 5 years, Lindsay, I think the thing that's going to be what's most interesting to me, and what may be more scary a little or unsettling, but how artificial intelligence is going to impact our K-12 education system is difficult for me to get my head around. And I believe that I think very easily in 5 years, we could be at a place where we're sort of laughing about those policies we were doing, back in 2025. I mean, it's going to be like, can you believe we were still, it's going to be like leeches, you were treating patients with leeches, or something like that. Like, can you believe we were talking about that? We are so, this is so far ahead, because I think that AI is going to be a lot of talk about personalized education for students. That's a real thing. Every child learns differently, different passions, different ways that they learn. And AI is going to be able to fill that gap. That technology is going to be able to provide that child with an educational experience that is 100% tailored to that child. Now, okay, what's that mean for teachers would be the next question. And I think I'm very optimistic. I'm very bullish on the teaching profession still. I think that teachers will remain the most critical part of a child's education. The technology is a great tool. It will help, to fill that, help that child fill those gaps in a way that child understands. And if a teacher can spend more time kind of on the human part of the student and less on the technical, how to teach fractions, that's a valuable shift.
And we know every child learns a little bit different.
Yeah,
So
that is true.
maybe that will
Almost
help.
good.
That will help there and allow
Yeah.
the teacher to your point, to stay on the guidance and motivational side. And truly, if they're even having an issue, maybe with a learning disability or something, that's where the teacher then can come in. It's fascinating where our world will be in 5,
Yeah.
10, 15 years. So we're going to continue to have these conversations. South Carolina is not asking these questions alone or kind of debating these things alone. Many states across the South, really across the country, are wrestling with the same issues. So I know that you, again, have had a significant role within our region. And so you've had those conversations across state lines. Is that where your focus will be, kind of learning that next wave of what AI could mean and be in our schools? Or what kind of lessons are you hoping to learn from other states, or maybe even ready to share from when we have these kind of cross-state boundary convenings and conversations?
Well, that's talking about CSG South, and I love CSG South, and your crew, you and your crew, and my experience there has been so valuable to me. And I've stolen ideas that I've gotten. I tell you, we do a lot of different things. The programs are great. You learn a lot from those. But I swear, sitting around a table and just having people talk about what they're doing in their states or what they're proud of, or it could be a failure. We tried this, it didn't work out. Just whatever story they've got. to me has been so valuable, and given me not just good ideas but motivation. Where I've got 10 ideas out there, and I'm listening to this person talk about, well, that's idea number 3 on my list, and I go, wow, I need to put that up to number 1. It motivates you to really push that one instead, because in this role, and this would be anybody in the General Assembly anywhere, is you pull a lot of different ways, and it's really a lot of times which one is really most important, and which one is really going to be most impactful, and you got a lot of pressures to send your priorities somewhere else, and that has been helpful to me. I'll tell you this: you were there, I think, but it was last year maybe, and we were in a meeting, and somebody, and I think he was from Kentucky. I'm not sure, but some legislator from another state just calls me out in the meeting and said, "Yeah, I was here last year, and Senator Hembree from South Carolina points at me. He said he talked about this, and I thought it was a pretty good idea, and I called his office, and we passed it, and it's working great." And I was like, "Wow!" It was so flattering. It was really flattering that this stranger who I didn't know from anybody had done the same thing within had and it was working. They had enacted it, and he was excited about it, and it's kind of like, wow. So you getting the chance to steal somebody's good idea is great, but getting a chance to share one that somebody says thank you for is really makes you feel good, and a good part of the whole good part of the process.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's how I've been tracking some of these literacy rates and what's going on in the South, and even teacher pay increasing. I know Arkansas last year did something on that, and I'm sure several states are talking about school funding formulas and kind of saying how are you approaching this, because some of them have not updated them in 40 years.
Yeah.
So it's a great resource for you all to be able to talk and convene and share your ideas, and then pull what works and what you think might work for your state, and then lessons learned. Make sure you share what doesn't.
Yeah.
So before we close, I want to end with a question we ask all of our guests.
All right.
What is the best piece of professional advice you've ever received, and how does it shape the way you approach public service today?
The one that pops into my head was, really was to take care of, but have everybody's back, have everybody's back. And I really was probably goes more to my days managing a lot of people. But it works in the General Assembly too, is to be looking out for them, and helping them feel like somebody's got their back. And I'm the elected guy, particularly with staff. I'm the elected guy. You throw your rocks at me. It's okay. That's what I signed up for. You don't throw rocks at my staff. That's not cool. We're not going to have that. And but knowing that, them knowing, but I try to do that with my fellow senators too, that to help to let them know that I'm not going to. You're not going to read me talking about you in the newspaper. I mean, it's just I'm gonna try to have your back. If I can't have your back, I mean, there's some of them that just would rather me not have their back. Now, there's that too, but I really try to extend that to my colleagues, and I think that's probably, I mean, it builds trust. It's about trust, and it kind of grows into trust.
Well, it's kind of full circle too. It's how you started this podcast discussion with me. It was talking about having the backs of the students too. So,
oh yeah, well, yeah.
Really is something that you see throughout the work that you're doing, and it's built in, kind of ingrained in who you are. So,
well, maybe that may be. I guess that's a good point. Some good observation. Yeah.
Well, Senator Hembree, thank you for joining us and for sharing your perspective on where South Carolina stands today and where education policy may be heading next. I also want to take a moment to thank you for your past leadership with our Education Policy Committee at the Southern Legislative Conference, and for your continued contributions in the Southern region and across the Council of State Governments footprint. So you step in the trenches with me often, so thank you.
I'm glad to. You're a good one to be. You're a good one to be fighting with. That's for sure. So you've got, because I know you've got my back. So yeah, I got yours. There we go.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Real Estate. For more conversations like this and more about the work of CSG South, visit csgsouth.org. I'm Lindsey Gray. Let's keep it real.
Thank you for joining us today on Real Estate, where we keep it real about what really matters.